years it's been pulsating through Newcastle's industrial veins, pumping billions upon billions of dollars into the city's economy, and at the same time richly rewarding shareholders in BHP, a company with the big Australian image. In part, Newcastle owes its Steel City image to a BHP visionary, Guillaume Daniel Delprat, better known as GD Delprat, or Delhi, to his contemporaries.
I was born on September the 1st, 1856, in Holland, where my father, a Scottish Army officer, was stationed. 16 years later, I was in Scotland as an engineering apprentice working on the original and ill-fated Tay Bridge. It was a job that almost cost me my life. I was a last-minute replacement for an absent worker in a diving bell. On the shift I was originally rostered, 6 of my workmates were drowned. Returning to Holland 4 years later, I continued my studies in Amsterdam and for a time was assistant to the physicist Professor van der Waal. I visited Spain, where I was engaged at the Rio Tinto copper mines. This company is now synonymous with coal mining in the Hunter Valley and mining elsewhere in Australia. I was subsequently connected with the Bead Company, Newcastle-on-Tyne, and also held appointments in Norway and Canada. Whilst in Canada, I was approached to become General Manager of the Broken Hill Proprietary Company Limited, which was then producing large quantities of silver and lead. The company cabled me, offering me £1,500 a year and a house free. I finally settled for £2,000 for 3 years and free passage for my family. I arrived in Adelaide in September 1898, and my wife and family of 5 girls and 2 sons followed. It was my technical skill and practical experience of non-ferrous mining in other parts of the world which had brought me to Broken Hill. At this mining town in the far west of New South Wales, I soon realised the value of the zinc in the tailings, and my efforts to recover this were successful by means of a flotation process. I was considered to be strong and fearless, but always fair, and the BHP board was pleased with me as its new manager. At this time, Australia was spending £6 million, or $10 million a year, on importing steel rails. After becoming General Manager of the BHP, Board Chairman John Darling and I were anxious for the Broken Hill Proprietary Company to move our operations from silver to iron and steel. Finally, I made an ultimatum. The Board of Directors should save the company from the prospect of failure by grasping the opportunity of a future more prosperous than the prosperous past of the Broken Hill Proprietary Company. Accepting my recommendation, I was on my way overseas in 1911 to obtain the best advice possible by canvassing the leading iron and steel producing countries and to engage a suitable expert. It was a strenuous tour. Only in Germany did I hear some derogatory remarks. After the tour, I exchanged greetings with an old friend, in German, of course. Finally, a member of the group who had shown me around told me he did not realize I could speak German fluently. They obviously did not know about my linguistic abilities. In the United States, I met an engineer, David Baker. On my recommendation, BHP engaged Baker as a consultant to evaluate a suitable site in Australia for a steel-making plant. Our proposal drew flack from the Labour Party in New South Wales. It had been a plank in the Labour platform for a steelworks to be erected and run by the New South Wales government. I informed the government that my company was determined to construct an iron steelworks. However, Baker and myself could not agree on the final location for the steel mill. Baker wanted the works to be built at Newcastle near the Cove and transport the ore from Hummock Hill in South Australia, while I favoured Hummock Hill and the coal to be shipped from Newcastle. Newcastle won the day. Baker was impressed with an expansive swamp owned by the company on the shores of Newcastle Harbour, where the Wallaroo Company had operated a copper smelter. BHP bought more land and became a sprawling industrial site after the New South Wales government allowed the company to acquire another 100 hectares of water frontage under a special Act of Parliament. In Baker's opinion, this was an ideal location for steel making. Mines around Newcastle were producing top coal for coke making, the city had a good port facility, and the labour was plentiful. With Baker as works manager, I made frequent trips to Newcastle to oversee the whole construction phase, which began in 1913. Getting to the site from my city hotel was an ordeal. I caught a tram to the end of the line at Carrington and trudged about a mile through mudflats to the site. I was to be saved from this weary experience in 1914. The company built me a cottage on a knoll, which had a commanding view of the work site. It was simply known as Delprat Cottage. Constructing the steelworks was an undertaking of massive proportion. The old smelting furnaces and stacks were demolished, the swamp was reclaimed, the Hunter River dredged, and a wharf built to take large ships. Thousands of piles were driven to support the foundations for the towering buildings where steel would be made. Most of the plant was shipped to the United States. A number of Americans also came over to man key positions and train Newcastle tradesmen. By the time the works were opened by the Governor-General, Sir Rowland Munro Ferguson, on June the 2nd, 1915, the cost was more than £1.5 million, or about $3 million. It was my pleasure to address the 380 dignitaries at the official opening. The original plant consisted of one blast furnace with an annual pig iron capacity of 150,000 tonnes. 3 open hearth steel furnaces, a blooming mill and a heavy rail mill. Soon after, 3 batteries of coke ovens were added. There was a big demand for Newcastle steel from domestic and international manufacturers, making Australia a secondary industry country. It was wartime. Beside filling large orders for steel rails from both the Commonwealth and New South Wales governments, munitions were also manufactured for the nation's war effort. In 1920, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales toured the plant. The workers put on quite a show for the royal visitor. It was ironic that at a meeting of the board in Newcastle in 1921, I tendered my resignation as General Manager of BHP. I was succeeded by Essington Lewis. Newcastle Steelworks was making about 250,000 ingot tons a year, large for the times. The company's growth in the years since my retirement at the age of 66 has been one of the notable stories of modern Australia. It's been claimed that the effect of my work was not fully realised until after the outbreak of World War II, when the steel and munitions turned out by the Broken Hill Proprietary Company Limited were of incalculable value to Australia. My cottage was a sentinel of bricks and tiles perched on a ridge. For 85 years it silently watched over the rise and fall of steelmaking in Newcastle. At its peak of operation, the workforce here totalled 11,600, producing up to 2 million tonnes annually. September 1999. The rivulets of molten steel have ceased, the blast furnaces are silent, the chimney stacks smokeless, and the Newcastle's romance with iron and steel is over. Well, not quite. Operations will continue in the rod, bar and wire mills, giving work to 1,000 people. However, the 1.25 million tonnes of steel billet needed each year will be railed to Newcastle from BHP's new billet caster at Whyalla in South Australia, and the company's electric arc furnace steel mill in Sydney. My cottage was in disrepair for many years. The company has had my Newcastle residence painstakingly restored to its original condition, perhaps as a token reminder of the part I played in establishing steelmaking on a major scale in Australia at Newcastle, the country's oldest iron and steel plant. Delprat Cottage will be a repository filled with facts, figures, and riveting stories from 3 generations of workers who toiled for 84 years to secure BHP's fortunes. Forge Newcastle as an industrial postcard to the world, as well as making Australia self-sufficient in steel. I, William Daniel Delprat, welcome you to my cottage. May you learn more about me, the BHP Proprietary Company, and Newcastle as a steelmaker.